Hello everyone and welcome to my channel YNR Trends. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Oh my god. The words tore out of Noah's throat like a wounded animal's cry as he collapsed to his knees on the cold concrete. His arms wrapping around Sienna's lifeless body with a desperation that bordered on madness. His hands shaking violently as if he could will warmth back into her skin. As if squeezing her close enough could somehow pull her soul back from wherever it had fled, and the echo of his scream seemed to ricochet through the abandoned warehouse, bouncing off rusted beams and shattered windows, a haunting chorus of disbelief, grief, and raw horror that refused to be silenced, because this wasn't supposed to happen, not like this, not to her, not after everything they had survived. And as Noah pressed his forehead to Sienna's, tears streaming down his face in uncontrollable waves, his mind fractured into 1,000 jagged pieces, replaying every moment that had led them here, the secrets whispered in the dark, the fear in Sienna's eyes when she told him Matt was watching them, always watching, the way her voice trembled when she said his name, like even speaking it aloud could summon something evil. And now here she was, her eyes glassy and unseeing, her lips parted as if she had been about to say something important, something that might have saved them all, and Noah sobbed harder, his chest convulsing as he rocked her back and forth, muttering apologies over and over again, telling her he should have protected her, that he should have listened sooner, that he should never have let her come here alone because deep down, buried beneath the shock and agony, a terrible clarity was forming, sharp and undeniable, slicing through his denial like a blade. And when he finally lifted his head, his face streaked with tears and fury, his voice cracked but thunderous as he screamed into the emptiness, "Matt is a murderer." The words exploding out of him like a gunshot, carrying with them the weight of truth, accusation, and a promise of reckoning, because this was no accident, no tragic coincidence. This was the end result of manipulation, obsession, and cruelty that had been festering for far too long. And as Noah's cry echoed, memories surged through him with brutal intensity. Matt's charming smile that never reached his eyes, the subtle threats disguised as concern, the way he always seemed one step ahead, controlling the narrative, twisting facts until everyone doubted Sienna, doubted Noah, doubted reality itself. And now the mask had slipped, leaving behind nothing but blood and death, and Noah felt something inside him snap, a clean, terrifying break between the man he had been and the man he was becoming in this moment, because grief was giving way to rage, and rage was sharpening into resolve. And as he gently laid Sienna down, brushing a strand of hair from her face with trembling tenderness, he whispered a vow through clenched teeth, promising her that Matt would pay, that the truth would come out, that Genoa City would finally see him for the monster he was, even if it destroyed everything in the process. And outside the warehouse, sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder, closer, a reminder that the world was catching up to this nightmare. But inside, time felt suspended, stretched thin by sorrow and shock, and Noah barely registered the flashing lights spilling through the broken windows, barely noticed the officer shouting his name, because all he could see was Sienna, all he could feel was the crushing weight of loss and guilt pressing down on his chest. And when the police finally pulled him away, his anguished screams filling the air as he fought them, reaching for her one last time, the sound cut straight through every witness present, sending chills down spines and tears to eyes, because this was not just a crime scene, this was the shattering of a future, the violent end of hope. And as Noah was restrained, his gaze locked onto Sienna's still form, his expression hardened with a terrifying calm that settled over him like armor. And in that moment everyone knew, this was only the beginning, because Matt had crossed a line that could never be erased, and Noah Newman, broken and burning with vengeance, would not rest until justice was served, no matter how many powerful names were exposed, no matter how many secrets were dragged into the light, because Sienna's death would not be silenced, and the truth, like Noah's scream, would echo through Genoa City until it shattered everything in its path. The aftershock began the moment Noah was pulled away, because grief never truly pauses, it mutates, and as the warehouse doors slammed shut behind the flashing lights and chaos, a deeper, more dangerous silence settled in its place, one that crawled into Noah's bones and refused to leave. And even as detectives wrapped Sienna's body in a stark white sheet, even as cameras flashed and murmurs rippled through the gathered crowd, Noah's mind was already racing ahead, stitching together fragments of memory with horrifying precision, realizing that every warning Sienna had whispered now sounded like a confession from beyond the grave. Every time she'd flinched at her phone buzzing, Every time she'd begged Noah to believe her when she said Matt wasn't finished, that he would never let her go, and at the police station, under harsh fluorescent lights that made everything feel cold and unreal, Noah sat rigid in the interrogation room. His knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the metal table, answering questions in a hollow voice while his eyes burned with a fire that refused to dim, because while the officer spoke of timelines and alibis, Noah could see only one face, Matt's, and it haunted him with chilling clarity, the smug confidence, the calculated pauses, the way he always knew just how much fear to apply without leaving bruises, and when a detective mentioned Matt's name aloud, Noah's head snapped up so fast it startled everyone in the room, his voice low and deadly as he repeated it like a curse, like a verdict already passed, insisting they look deeper, insisting they stop underestimating a man who had spent years hiding behind charm and privilege, because Matt didn't need to get his hands dirty to kill someone. He knew how to manipulate, how to corner, how to destroy from the shadows, and as dawn broke over Genoa City, the news exploded like wildfire, headlines screaming about tragedy, speculation, and scandal, while whispers spread through society circles and corporate boardrooms alike, because Matt wasn't just anyone. He was connected, protected, and powerful, and that made Sienna's death far more dangerous than anyone wanted to admit, especially when anonymous tips began pouring in, conflicting stories designed to confuse, muddying the waters just enough to buy time, and Noah sensed it immediately, the invisible machinery grinding into motion, erasing tracks, rewriting narratives, trying to turn Sienna into a victim of circumstance instead of a woman silenced by obsession. And across town, Matt stood in front of a mirror in his pristine penthouse, calmly adjusting his cufflinks as the news played softly in the background, his expression unreadable, his eyes dark with something that looked disturbingly close to satisfaction, because chaos was his element, and he had already planned for this moment, rehearsed it in his mind 100 times, crafting grief for public display, outrage for the cameras, and just enough distance from Sienna to appear innocent. And when reporters later swarmed him, shoving microphones in his face, his voice trembled perfectly as he spoke of heartbreak and shock, of loss and unanswered questions, while behind the performance, his thoughts were razor-sharp, calculating who knew what, who could be silenced, and who needed to be sacrificed to protect himself. But what Matt didn't anticipate, what cracked the flawless surface of his control, was Noah's refusal to break. Because instead of retreating into grief, Noah began pushing back, reaching out to people Sienna had trusted, following trails she'd left behind like breadcrumbs, discovering burner phones, hidden emails, recorded voicemails filled with fear and urgency, each one tightening the noose, each one painting a picture so damning it made Noah's hands shake with rage. And as he listened to Sienna's recorded voice warning him that, if anything happens to me, it's Matt, something shifted irrevocably inside him, turning pain into purpose. And soon, others began to notice the inconsistencies too: security footage that mysteriously vanished, witnesses who suddenly changed their stories, financial transfers that made no sense unless someone was paying for silence, and Genoa City, a place built on secrets, began to feel the ground tremble beneath it, because this wasn't just about murder anymore, it was about exposure, about how far someone would go to maintain control. And as Noah stood at Sienna's memorial days later, dressed in black, his face carved from stone, he didn't cry, didn't speak, didn't look away from Matt when their eyes met across the room, because in that charged silence passed something far more terrifying than words, a promise, unspoken but absolute, that this story was far from over, that Sienna's death would not fade into rumor or be buried under influence and lies. And as thunder rolled outside and rain streaked down the windows like tears, one truth became impossible to ignore. Matt had started a war he could no longer control, and Noah, fueled by love, loss, and a hunger for justice, was just getting started. The cracks in the mask unfolded with a quiet intensity that was far more dangerous than any public accusation, because while Genoa City buzzed with rumors and divided loyalties, the real battle was happening in the shadows, where secrets were traded like currency and fear dictated every move, and Noah, hollow-eyed but razor-focused, moved through the city like a man possessed, following Sienna's trail with a devotion that bordered on obsession, because every step felt like walking beside her ghost, guiding him toward truth she'd died trying to expose. And it was during one of those sleepless nights, surrounded by files, phones, and scribbled notes in his apartment, that Noah discovered the first undeniable crack in Matt's perfect alibi. A timestamp that didn't align, a call placed minutes after Matt claimed he was alone, a voice distorted but unmistakably his, barking orders with a fury that sent chills down Noah's spine. And as Noah pieced it together, his heart pounded not with hope but with grim certainty, because Matt hadn't just orchestrated Sienna's death, he'd panicked, and panic always left fingerprints, and across town Matt felt it too, the shift in the air, the subtle unraveling of control that had always come so easily to him, manifesting in restless nights and sudden flashes of anger when things didn't go exactly as planned, because people were asking questions they weren't supposed to ask, because Noah wasn't playing the grieving lover anymore. He was hunting, and when Matt confronted one of his intermediaries in a hushed, furious exchange that ended with threats and shattered glass, it became clear that loyalty purchased with money and fear was a fragile thing, especially when prison loomed like a shadow at the edge of every conversation, and the tension finally snapped when an unexpected ally stepped forward, someone from Matt's past, someone who had once benefited from his protection, and now realized the price of that silence was far too high. And when this person approached Noah with trembling hands and a story that matched Sienna's warnings almost word for word, Noah knew the tide was turning, because now it wasn't just his word against Matt's, it was a pattern, a history of manipulation, control and destruction that stretched back years. And as this witness described how Matt had obsessed over Sienna, monitored her movements, tracked her calls, and spoken chillingly about ending problems before they grow teeth, Noah felt his stomach twist with rage and vindication, because the monster Sienna had seen was finally stepping into the light, and yet Matt still smiled in public, still played the role of the grieving associate, but those closest to him began to notice the cracks, the clenched jaw when Noah's name was mentioned, the cold flashes of hatred that slipped through his eyes, the way his composure shattered behind closed doors, because control was his drug, and it was being ripped away piece by piece. And when Matt finally confronted Noah in a crowded place, lowering his voice to deliver a thinly veiled threat masked as concern, Noah didn't flinch, didn't rise to it. He simply leaned in and whispered back something that drained the color from Matt's face. That Sienna had left proof, that she had planned for this, that she had known Matt would come for her and had taken steps to make sure he couldn't bury the truth. And in that moment, the power shifted unmistakably, because fear flickered in Matt's eyes for the first time, real fear. The kind that comes when a man realizes he's no longer the one pulling the strings. And as Matt walked away, his shoulders stiff and his breathing uneven, Noah watched him go with a cold resolve settling deep in his chest, understanding that exposure was inevitable now, that it wasn't a matter of if but when. And as thunder cracked over Genoa City once more, mirroring the fracture spreading through Matt's carefully constructed world, Noah allowed himself one quiet thought, whispered to Sienna's memory like a promise carried on the storm, that the mask was breaking and soon, everyone would see what he had always been hiding. The point of no return came not with a scream, but with a decision, because as the sun dipped below Genoa City and shadows stretched long across the skyline, Noah finally understood that grief alone would not honor Sienna, action would, and standing alone in his apartment, surrounded by the evidence she had risked everything to gather, he felt the weight of her final fear settle over him like a command, urging him forward even as doubt clawed at his chest, because Matt was powerful, insulated by money, influence, and a lifetime of people willing to look the other way, and going after him meant inviting destruction into Noah's own life. Yet the thought of doing nothing, of letting Sienna's death be reduced to speculation and whispered rumors, was far more unbearable, and so Noah made the call that changed everything, reaching out to law enforcement with proof too detailed to ignore, recordings too damning to dismiss, and a narrative so clear it cut through the fog of lies like lightning, through storm clouds. And when the detectives listened, really listened, the room went silent, because this wasn't circumstantial anymore. It was deliberate, calculated, and cold. And outside that room, the city shifted, unaware that the ground beneath one of its most carefully protected figures was beginning to crack, and meanwhile Matt sensed it, that primal instinct of a predator realizing the hunt had reversed, manifesting in sudden paranoia, in frantic calls unanswered, in doors once open, now firmly closed, because power evaporates quickly when fear outweighs loyalty. And when Matt finally turned on the news and saw his own name linked to the word investigation, something in him fractured, not remorse, not regret, but rage at losing control, because for the first time, the story was no longer his to shape. And as night fell, Noah visited Sienna's grave, standing there in the stillness with tears silently carving lines down his face, whispering that he was scared that this fight might cost him everything, but that he would not stop, not now, not ever, because her voice deserved to be heard, Her truth deserved justice, and as a cold wind swept through the cemetery, rustling the leaves like whispered approval, Noah straightened, his sorrow transforming into something unbreakable, and back in the city, Matt sat alone in his darkened penthouse, staring at his reflection in the glass, realizing too late that monsters don't get to decide how their stories end. And as sirens wailed faintly in the distance, close enough to be real, far enough to inspire dread, the final truth settled over them both. Sienna's death had ignited a reckoning that could not be stopped, and nothing, not fear, not money, not manipulation, would ever put the darkness back where it belonged.